Welcome to Own the Grey, a podcast to dispel the notion that aging is undesirable and setting new, positive attitudes. I'm Debra Jones, and I believe you can be vibrant and healthy throughout the best years of your life. Have you ever joked that your hairstylist knows more about your personal life than your family does? Or perhaps a friend has said her hairstylist fixes more than just her hair. Hairdressers can be very wise and caring, and they hear as many stories about people's lives as I do as a therapist. Well, today I'm talking with Cindy Nolet, who has some extraordinary wisdom gained through all her years as a hairdresser. And it was this experience that led her to becoming a coach and a healer at her after retirement business, Ruby Vision Empowerment. Cindy and I have shared interest in more than just empowering individuals, as we're both devoted to healing our environment as well. And while researching about Cindy, I discovered a shared passion for feng shui and space clearing. So I was delighted to invite Cindy onto the podcast to give her another avenue to share her knowledge and wisdom. As you'll discover, Cindy has a lot to share, and we'll start with a focus on the lesser known historical and spiritual facts about hair that might surprise and delight you. Naturally, we'll talk about owning the gray. Well, why wouldn't we? Welcome to Own the Gray, Cindy.
Thank you so much for having me, Deborah. I enjoy your podcast. I enjoy your mission. Back in the background, I thought, you know what? The owning the gray keeps coming to me like, okay, there is something to that. It's obviously about wisdom. And I don't know if the average person knows exactly the different levels and hidden levels of what wisdom means and hair color and through the ages. So I thought that I would put together some content for us to share. And it comes with a warning because I want our listeners to investigate everything that I say, because being curious is exactly what my mission is, so that someone can, self-explore and create another version of themselves that maybe that is waiting for them. And I think the subject of hair is going to be surprising today.
I know we've had a brief conversation about it, and it surprised me actually how much I don't know about what's been on my head for all of my life. But what makes you unique? What do you do in your coaching practice?
Well, I think what makes me unique is a series of events, starting with the fact that I was doing hair from home, an entrepreneur from home, raising the family, having a very private space. So when you mentioned that maybe your hairdresser knows more than what your family does, because like it's a one-on-one conversation, things like just get poured out, and hopefully it was feeling safe for everyone. And I was like genuinely interested and wanted to hear and wanted to listen. And I fell on some really, really great nuggets of wisdom over the years just by being in that space. And then that kind of ran into, okay, so now I can maybe overflow it again. And I really love that idea. So in my coaching practice, I feel like it's very personal. I love to ask questions and just really get to know the person on an intellectual and spiritual level. I love meeting new people, and I love making a difference. But I would say that this is a relatively new role with me stepping out from the chair and in front of a camera, and that I am here now to share a different role because I've spent so much time standing behind a person that it's new for me. But I think that the 2020, made that happen and made me shift. So so the coaching thing. And I've had a lot of nudges from my higher sources that said I should be doing more of the coaching business rather than just the hairdressing. We moved from where we raised the children to a house that we had a property that we had purchased and a house that we had built. We have just such miraculous occurrences that happen. Like we had this really large house put up in 4 months. It took us longer to find the builder than it did for us to put up the house. We lived there for 5.5 years. And then things were just changing. Kids were leaving the house. We have twins, so they're leaving for school. My husband's tired of traveling too many days in a row. And I realized that I was doing hair morning, noon, and night, thinking like, oh, it's temporary. Like, surely people are going to drop off because they don't want to be out here in the country now. But it continued. I thought, okay, just keep doing it. It's the work is in front of you. And then when my life took a pivot around 2016 and everybody wasn't happy with what was happening, it was too much to upkeep. Then I had a conversation with God and I said, okay, so we're selling this house. This is our dream house. And I'm feeling really bad because I was afraid to create my next new perfect because that house was perfect, that I thought that I was doing a disservice by leaving there. But I
Mhm.
realized that there is a new perfect. So I had a little conversation. I said, okay, so does that mean that I'm going to be stepping away from my clients again for hair and that I'm going to be doing my coaching? Is that the case? Do you want me to be into my Ruby Vision empowerment more? And so then left it at that. And then when we had our people that bought our beautiful home, her name is Ruby and his name is Rupin. So the double sign of going, yes, using your Ruby Vision empowerment, it's your time. And so that was kind of a knock on the head. But then again, I slipped and I got to the house where we're here now. And her clients kept coming. So I felt like I was doing my work. And then when 2020 happened, I thought, okay, this is another chance for me to listen. And so I closed the doors to the salon. This is where I'm standing on the other side of the chair now, too. So it's really great to have conversations with people because
Yeah.
when we have that communication with people, we have to have communication with ourselves. And even by having this chance to do the podcast with you, I did my notes and I wrote down a whole bunch of things. And by realizing that the communication that I needed to share with you wasn't clear enough, that I was learning things about myself just with the content that we're going to talk about today. So it's the self communication and the whole thing of having the person be empowered to do that for themselves.
The opportunities for us to shift and grow in 2020, everybody did shift somehow, but it created opportunities for us to really get to the core of what we wanted to do. It's like we had choice at that point rather than going through on the hamster wheel of life, right? And so that's what I found, my podcast kind of took off around that time as well. It's just something that we've all evolved and grown in that time. And if we've been listening to our guidance within ourselves or higher self, whatever you believe in, this is a time for us to actually just step forward into the unknown. It's all unknown, isn't it? First off, I wanted to ask you why the word Ruby Vision?
Oh, that's a hidden layer. Okay, so interesting. So, my name is not Ruby, and I don't have beautiful copper red hair like yourselves for our listeners. Deborah has beautiful copper red hair, and the combination of your eye color is very unique. So, I want all of our listeners to know what I'm looking at right now. So, the Ruby Vision was, I think it was around 2009. Was I did a hypnosis from a wonderful person from Toronto, because the hypnosis person says, "What's your name?" I'm like, Ruby. And I had to really push it out. And then after that, you can't forget those things. And I did question the level of the hypnosis, but we know that when we've had a dream that just float away, it wasn't really deep enough for us to care about. But when you have hypnosis and it's something that you need to care about, it stays in the forefront. So it's really vivid and you don't forget it. And also, I just wanted to add too, with the information that we're sharing here today, you don't have to be on board with it all. What's yours, you'll remember, or it'll come back at a time when you're ready for it. But we're going to go through some things that might not sit with you, in your normal everyday conversation, and that's life with Cindy. But that's the name was Ruby, and then, of course, you go down to that whole what does ruby mean? In the Bible, it's ruby's more precious than all that kind of stuff. You can just go crazy with that. So yeah, we're looking at about 14 plus years where that's still there for me.
I love it. I love it. I love the backstories of these things. That's really cool. So let's jump in. I would like to talk about owning the gray. What can you share with us? about that, whether it's a good idea or, I mean, as a hairdresser, I'm sure you're used to covering up the gray for a lot of people. So, what can you share with us about owning the gray?
Well, I'm going to challenge just the hair color of owning the gray today. So I feel like it falls on multiple categories of conversation. So for to me, having gray hair is to having wisdom, but I believe you have to own it. And I believe that it's at any age. So it's not just when we turn silver. And we see that, God in heaven with his white hair, we always think there's wisdom. So somebody with the white gray hair has the wisdom. For me, I'm talking about wisdom and the conversation about gray. I loved to learn from the children when I did their hair. And so there's that magical age. And have you ever had a 3-year-old say such the darndest things? Like they'll say something like a past life. When they start talking really well and say, "Oh, do you remember when I was your mother and I used to carry you on my shoulders?" Like I have had these stories from other mothers, right? So I'm like,
Yeah,
oh my
yeah.
gosh, that's amazing. So then we have lots of philosophies on like the years of 0 to 6 and how they have the alpha and the theta waves going on in their brain. And that's the meditation and hypnosis. So that's the ability for them to create and to see and to imagine, but they also have that where they're getting influenced by other people's ideas. But then the 7-year-old or the school age child is definitely in the hypnosis and the absorbing other people's rituals and regurgitating, like memorizing. So it's not only do you have free thought, it's more like you need to like remember the thoughts that come from school. It's probably better that some of the kids don't go to school too young. But I have been hairdressing for 34 years in this role of the life coach. Even when I was younger, people would ask me for advice and I couldn't understand that. But whenever I was 7, I actually saw a UFO. And in this
Did you?
broad summer day with this clear blue sky, silver disc came, and my sister had to go off and get the help, right? Because we were alone. But I stayed there and I was just looking at this beautiful disc and it was so quiet. So there's a little truth bomb about Cindy. And so that blew my mind open. Like that was like, I knew that I needed to question what was real and what wasn't real. People told me the whole thing. And
Yeah.
so the whole thing is my mom, my grandmother, my sister were coming back out to see this disc. But just as they were coming out, it was almost like that was their time to take off. And they just took off away from me. And I thought, wow. And I parked that far, far, far away. I didn't talk with anybody but back then. I doubt very
Mm,
much I talked. My mom, my dad, who they believed that I saw something, but it wasn't there to talk about. So through the life, you just kind of keep going with that. And the
mm,
hypnosis helped with, finding out that there was another Ruby. And then at 50, I did another self exploration and I was going back like, what was that? Knowing full well that the technology of having a flying disc is a human based technology. But also know that it could be from other dimensions or other whatever. But this is for the person that's listening to do your own
investigations
investigation.
and
But the idea is to question everything, question me. I have no problem with that. But kind of lost my train of thought. But that's where I thought, okay, we need to keep this going with these little kids and keep that conversation going with my clients too. Talk about things that are not necessarily comfortable for them.
so, okay, so I just want to unpack what I've heard you say and for our listeners also. So, you were talking about the gray hair being our wisdom. I'm just wondering the connection of gray hair and your story of the children and the innocence and the wonder in the world, that type of thing. What's that connection?
So jumping from the open mind of the children, which I believe that it's the owning the gray, owning the wisdom doesn't necessarily have to be just gray hair, that there's wisdom from all ages. But then jumping to when we start to have gray hair, we're in a new stage where we might just not really give a crap who's saying what. And again, especially after the 2020 thing, I might have been ready to change from one rule to the other, but the masses of people weren't. So I was up against the norm. And when you said, things really changed in 2020, like with my husband, they would never let their people work from home. They said it wasn't possible. But after 2020, there's so many more things that were more possible. So
Mm,
then I'm just holding a little glimmer of hope from, until people found that own gray in their hair, then, there's always a glimmer to know that there's always something that curious, and kids are curious and they do have something to teach, but they usually get shut down. Now I'm 54 and I have glimmers, and I'm just not ready to uncover because I don't have enough. My husband keeps asking, when are you going to go? I'm like, I don't have enough yet, but I will.
I have heard that those with red hair go gray latest. Is that true?
From my observation, I would say yes. I would say that there is a change in the coloring of the copper hair, red hair, but it's just a little bit more like maybe not as bright or as vibrant as it could have been. It maybe just kind of tones down a little bit. In my experience, they are the last to go gray.
That's really interesting because I had turned 50 and I started to see some gray hairs coming in, and I would actually pluck them out. I didn't want to see them. When I started the podcast, because it was associated with sharing your wisdom, coming to the age where, as you said, you don't care so much about people's judgment of what you think and believe. That kind of ties in with what you were saying. And then I thought, well, owning the gray, I got to start letting them through. I've got to, put my money where my mouth is and actually do that. But I'm noticing that there's a few gray hairs coming through for me, but really nothing, I don't see myself turning gray. It's not, a big overnight thing. However, my brother went gray at 21. Your age and your gray hair, there isn't necessarily a correlation, but the idea of owning the gray for me is owning your wisdom. And that's exactly what we've been talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I do love that. And I do love there's that stage, 50, and there is some philosophy that talks about age and by the time you're 50. But again, Oprah says 50 is the new 40, so I'm all good with that. I just wanted to mention though that once upon a time I decided, okay, so there's some chemicals involved in this coloring. So I was choosing something a little more ethical, and it was really out of the norm. It's really hard to find, but of course it found me. So I kept going with it. And it's like a biodynamic color. So it's farm to chair. It's beyond organic. And I've been using that for the last quite a few years for my clients. So I was feeling pretty confident that I could continue that beauty kind of, how we think of beauty of not having gray. But I also started in the days when the little ladies would cut their hair short because those little grays that we were talking about would stand straight up on end and they didn't know what to do with them. They would cut their hair the length of these silly little gray hairs, and they would use their little rollers to keep them in line. But I also think that we have lots more products, and the beauty industry is really against turning gray. So they're going to do what they can to help us spend a lot more money. But go with that, it goes, now we have be able to have the length of the hair. And also with that, the longer the hair, the more minerals we have in our hair.
Well, that's interesting. What might surprise us about the length of our hair? And should we be cutting it?
Well, I say, do you trust your hairdresser because they want to make sure that you're not scissor happy? So if it's your choice to cut your hair, that's great. But the longer the hair, the more that you're having a little bit more of energy field around you, and it feels comfortable and such like that. So I just wanted to say that is something to do with hair being spiritual, not just a physical thing that we hold dear to us because we look like a certain way because we have a certain hair, but it also holds the wisdom factor in a spiritual sense, which is something that I fell upon too over the years. And just being in a certain aura field of a person, you want to be able to trust your hairdresser. You want to make sure that they have the best interests at heart. And so, whatever my path was, I really felt like I was pretty dedicated to helping the person feel more beautiful and helping them feel more confident. And, really after a while, the hair process was a little bit more of a braille. I could feel more what we were doing. So everybody was feeling a little more confident with me because we had a deep conversation going on. And then we would have, some of those communication that kind of out there. So as soon as you say something and put it out on the airwaves, you can have those aha moments. Sometimes we can feel it in our hair on our head, and other times we can feel it on the hair on our arms and our neck. And those little hairs are spiritual antennas. They're called God antennas. And the hair follicles are a special little organ to help those hairs do what they need to do. So outside of our skin, we have our physical body, and then just 2, 3 inches outside of our physical body, we have the etheric field. And in that etheric field is a blueprint of our next best self. So if we are onto something and our spirit, our higher selves want us to make a move to something else and maybe shed some old beliefs or old behaviors, then the person can have those hairs stand up, and it's visceral, so they can't deny it. And then we'll talk about it. And then I'll have it if they're saying something, because sometimes people are a little bit
Yep.
more deep than others. And I really enjoy when they give me that spiritual thrill, because I love it too. But then the conversation goes on, and then they might change it, whatever, and get into the doom and gloom. But I'll try to recap and say, okay, let's go back to what we were talking about when we had those aha moments. So, what were we talking about? What is your next move? And so then I kind of give a creation where don't just let that slide, because that just fluffs off and we forget it too much. And because outside of the salon is our everyday life where we need to get groceries and run the kids around or what have you. So I try to go back to like, okay, that feeling that must have been a message for us. Or one of us, let's do something about it. So I
All
really feel
right.
like that hair is connected to another field.
I just want to unpack that because that's kind of fascinating. So when I'm working with a client and I get a hit or a download from spirit to share with them, and I get, we can call it goosebumps, but the hairs stand on your legs and arms, right? Um, so you're saying that when we get that sensation, that is us connecting with, to me, it feels like I'm connecting with the truth. How would you describe it? What's actually happening there when you get your hair standing on end?
I would definitely use the word truth. I think everyone can use the word truth. So if we're looking across the board at anybody who's listening to this conversation, you can recognize the truth. Something happens when you feel a conversation of a truth.
So that's something we can use as a guide for us to pay attention. That's what you were saying. Go back to that conversation when that happened. We need to pay attention to what that is, and that will guide us. Is that what you're saying?
I am saying yes, that for sure. So that truth, and I believe it's an elevated space. I feel like it's an elevated vibration. So it's not only just physical; it's a little more like next level you. So okay, let's evolve into that space. And the hairs are trying to say, that frequency in the auric field is finer, it's finer tuned. So we must be becoming less dense physically, even with conversation, to say, okay, let's look into something that's a little more spiritual, a little less dense, a little something that's better for us, something that's truthful. Stop living a lie, stop living, that kind of thing. So definitely, I would say the etheric field has qualities that are waiting for us to step into. And it's been around us since we were born. And it's time that we start looking back at it.
Interesting. So, what other tidbits of information do you have to share with us about hair?
Okay, let's look at this. So, the whole idea that you need to trust your hairdresser, you want them to be able to have your best interest and not just one day feel bad and leave you with a bad haircut. So, you want someone that's going to make you feel like that all the time. They don't always have to look the greatest, let me tell you. My clients definitely saw me in lots of ponytails and such. But there's lots of evidence from ancient past that they were very aware that their space was important. And of course, if you were from a royal lineage or bloodline, what have you, they would definitely have access to people like hairdressers and definitely have, the money and the funds to have the makeup and the hair. And we have, the Egyptian artifacts where you can see the hairdresser, and they even have one name of this guy is a man, Helnut, and not a helmet, but a helmet. He was doing the hair of a pharaoh. So they knew that their auric field was important and that they shouldn't be just letting anybody touch them. And we should do the same. We should always have from extending from our arms, our aura is out there. So the ends of our fingers, just imagine that space as being a pure end for me. Some people don't like hugging because you're definitely changing some, you're getting into it. If you're not in a good space, you don't want to hug somebody because that'll just throw you off a little more. But if you are in a good space and you want to hug somebody, then, you're definitely going to get some good stuff out of that.
Yeah, let me just talk about that personal space piece because I'm very well aware of personal space and energetic space, and that the width of your outstretched arms is your personal space.
Mm.
And anybody that's closer than that, you're now sharing energy with them. And so that's what you're saying, in the hairdresser's chair,
Mhm.
your hairdresser is in your space. That's why you need to have I would say, consensual energy exchange with that person. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, there could be a lot of reasons for that. Might not be something that they said or did. You're just picking up on their energy. But
Mhm.
I do share with people to be aware of your own energy space and to know that, if you just take a step away from somebody, if the energy doesn't feel right, then you're no longer sharing their energy. Would you say that that's been true for you?
Definitely, I would say that's true. You can really have a lot of good experiences when you're sharing energy like that. But the consensual is a really great word. I'd like to pick up on that because hair itself doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be short. It doesn't have to be gray. It doesn't have to be colored, but it's your choice. It's what you want. And for someone else to do something that you do or do not want, it needs to be consensual. So I have ran into somebody was saying, I remember when you said I had to have 10 different written whys before I cut my hair short. And so I was just on the weekend going, yeah, that's funny. And so with hair being spiritual and hair having power, the consensual thing is amazing because we have stories of the times in lots of societies where hair was cut or shaved when it's not consensual, and that
Mhm.
is stealing the person of their power. It's
Mm.
making them submit. So we have a really great story that I fell upon was, during the war, they had to navigate the terrain. So they used a First Nations person to help them scout. And of course, that person had to cut their hair short to conform to the army. And then that person lost their way after the hair was short and didn't have the sense of direction that they were very well known for. Like for us, we say, oh, on the right in the fridge and on the left, but they were saying no, go east, walk 100 feet, and then south. We don't know what that is. So that was their whole aura field was really attached to all the other pure things too. So if hair is pure and it can reach into like the nature and the whole thing, but it has to be consensual. So there are people, the monks, when they cut their hair themselves, they said that it was their choice, but it also could have been a program to submit to some of the, what do they call it, their training is really really harsh, right? Not everybody
Mhm.
wants to have such warriors in there, so it has to be consensual. It's not for everyone, but yes, you want to make sure that your hair is the power, and if you're getting it cut for a bad reason, like Samson had his hair cut and he lost his power because he didn't choose that, but good thing it grows again. It always grows. That's a certainty. If we do have a gray hair, like your brother when he was young, doesn't mean he's wiser than you. Because whether we use it or not, it doesn't really have anything to do with the hair color. It's how we conduct our life, and so we're hoping we all learn something today.
Agreed.
Yeah, so we always have the great poles, right? We have like the negative, positive, good, bad, sweet, savory. But I always wanted to talk about, the whole thing, black or white. It's that black or white kind of the fundamentalists, that they are hard and core. They'll follow every rule if it kills them. And then there's the charismatic, which I like to call the gray area, because in that gray area, we have this freedom to have a foot in both worlds. So we can see between the negative and the positive and somewhere being in the middle, and have an ear for somebody else's opinion and not try to change their mind with how you believe things, but to just be entertained with the idea, do your own investigation, and then again, like, if it's your truth, it's your truth. That kind of thing. So I really like the idea that I'm over the top in the gray zone, because sometimes, well, if I make a decision, it's fine. Like, I don't go back, when you're designing a house or whatever. Yeah, just pick the tile. That's it. Keep going forward. Way too much fun to be had and more investigation to be done. So I really like the idea and the fact that I did have that 7-year-old experience at that time when most people are entrained with, what we're supposed to remember. I didn't have a very good time in school, let me tell you. So right now I'm probably having the most fun I've had all my life right now is to color outside the lines and be charismatic. But Yeah, we're talking about the coloring of hair. Again, your hair and the rarity of your copper hair, and your eyes are blue or green.
They're blue.
So that itself is actually quite rare. We hit the idea that there's, physical properties to hair and there's spiritual. And I also, too, the fact that something on the negative side is that you can tell with the hair, if the person's not well. When we were doing perms back in the day, we had to wait at least 6 weeks till after somebody had surgery because there was that anesthetic was still in the hair and it just wouldn't respond the way you wanted to. Oh, and even it's so amazing. Like positive aspect with hair is like in the cultures where they use the braids, they would plant messages in their braiding. So only those that knew what the braiding meant would know that there was a message in there, and the rest of the world was oblivious because it wasn't a thing. So they would pass messages with braiding, certain braiding.
Do you mean like how they actually braided it, like the design of the braid, that kind of
Yes.
thing?
Yeah.
Hey, that's new. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was pretty neat. So that's like kind of an empowered thing, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so we know that there's lots of hidden agendas and we know that there's lots of levels, and we're going to talk about the hidden agenda of red hair. So we all know that in this day and age, there was this terrible phase talking about ginger hair and this and that. And I know women seem to be okay a little bit better, but men seem to have a little bit more of a problem with that. In my experience, I had the beautiful redheaded brothers. One was really red and one was more orange. But they're sensitive to heat and pain. And something about the anesthetic too, I guess, if someone was trying to get some surgery, I guess they have to adjust differently for red
Mm.
hair for whatever their body chemistry needs.
Wow. I wish they knew that when I went in for it because I've had terrible times with anesthetic.
Oh yeah, like didn't come out very well or didn't work
No, didn't
properly.
come out. Didn't come out. Wouldn't come out. That's
Yeah.
odd. I wish they'd have known that.
Well, the next time you have to, hope you don't, but let them know. You do your
Yeah.
research and then you can tell them. That's funny. So we've had a lot of stuff that was hidden about the red. And I'm an advocate for everybody that has red hair to do their own research. And when you're going on Google, just don't pick the first 10. Go deeper. Put in words of opposite and you really get some good information when you don't just let the algorithms tell you. But hair with a bad rap, like this day and age, I know I still have people that are struggling. They think, the males think that they have red hair, that they're not attractive. And I think that was on purpose. I'm going to say it. I think that was on purpose because back in the day, they have some information and some proof that redheads were in a higher standard, and they used them to be pharaohs, and they wouldn't want the rest of. So how there was always such levels in society. So the royals always kept themselves secret, like they have their own language. Even like in the Romans, they would have like a what do you call it? Like a slang that the common people would use. And even in Latin, like the common people would speak in this language, but the royals had a whole other language and they knew what they were talking about. But I think that's really, really interesting about the red. And so I'm loving that people are celebrating it. I loving that they're having those big conventions and people are showing up. And I just
Yes.
hope and I hope that we can support our men a little bit more in that category too, because they seem to be a little lagging on that. So I think that's really great if we could, reach out and just talk about hair being spiritual. Everyone has hair. Doesn't have to be a certain color for you. And you don't have to be a certain age to own your gray, own your wisdom.
Thanks for tuning into this season of Own the Grey. We hope you enjoyed the conversations and insights we've shared. We hope this podcast has inspired you to embrace the unknown and take control of your life. We'll be taking a short break before our next season, but in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us with your questions and feedback. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more updates. Until next time, own the grey and stay empowered.